10 years ago, I uploaded my first music theory video on this channel. And wow, 2015 was a different time. What exactly is music theory? Since then, I have lived in 7 locations across 5 states, and I have uploaded 152 videos. And fun fact, I'm still on the exact same laptop I was in August of 2015. But this first video that I uploaded was, what is music theory? Well, here's the thing, I don't really agree with myself anymore. So today let's ask the question, no, but really, what is music theory? We need to start with definitions. A good many arguments have persisted because the parties involved either refuse to provide a definition or refuse to accept a provided definition of pertinent terms. There's no sense in debating whether or not a hot dog is a sandwich if we cannot agree on the definition of sandwich or hot dog. Naturally, then, we must define music theory. When attempting to define this term, we really have 2 components that we need to nail down. First, music, and the second, theory. So, what is music? Wow, what an unbelievably large question we've just asked. Music is different things to different cultures at different times in history. If you are Jean-Philippe Rameau in 18th century France, then to you, music is science. If you're the ancient Chinese, then music is a law of the universe. And it can be used as an educational device in shaping humans, governments, and societies. If you're the ancient Greeks, then a sound can only be described as music by its relationship to another sound which is also described as music. If you're John Cage in 20th century United States, then even apparent silence can be considered music. But even 2 people belonging to the same culture at the same time can view music differently. If you're Schenker in early 20th century Germany, then music is tonal. But if you're Schoenberg, also 20th century Germany, then music is most definitely not tonal. Now, you may have heard that music is the universal language, but really, is it even a language? Probably a discussion for another video. Music is only universal in the same way that language is universal. So language is universal, but no one language is universal. And in the same way that we have many different types of languages, we have many different types of music. None of them are universal, and this is a good thing. It's really quite good for the field of music as a whole that this is not the case. I know we like to think of music as this one cohesive thing, but it's not. Music is many. So really, it's not music, it's more like musics. So the question is, can we come up with a definition for music that would satisfy all of these various types of music? I think we can. Perhaps then, at least, we could say that music is sound. Even a piece like 4 minutes and 33 seconds goes to prove that true silence isn't real. And now, I would go so far as to say that music is organized sound. Even if the composer left the structure of that piece to chance, it's organized to be left to chance. It's aesthetically arranged in some aspect. There is some sort of artistic intent and expression. I'm going to go one step further and say that music is humanly organized sound. I'm fairly certain that not everyone would agree with me on this definition, but that's okay. We have to cut the definition off somewhere. My apologies to the birds. Furthermore, music must take place in time. You cannot have a still frame of music like you can with a painting. Art must occupy space, music must occupy time. Music is, therefore, humanly organized sound in time, with an exceedingly loose definition of organized. And by exceedingly loose, I mean that it's held together by like zip ties and duct tape and some fishing line, and it's shoved in the appendix of like a choose your own adventure book. In some regards, music is music if the composer considers it to be music, i.e. artistic intent. However, even this is a Western-specific definition of music. Many cultures throughout human history would not consider just organized sound alone to be music. For some cultures, it's not music if it doesn't also include dance. Other cultures' definition of music might also include poetry. Remember, music is a lot of different things to a lot of different cultures living at different times in history, and it's also a lot of different things to people living in the same times and cultures. Beyond even that, each of us have different relationships with music. We are listeners, performers, conductors, composers, theorists, and critics. 1. Music is humanly organized sound in time. 2. Music as a whole is a collection of many non-universal sound organizing traditions. 3. Many of us have multiple relationships with music at the same time. And number 4, at the risk of sounding very obvious, music is for all of us. And if you've made it this far into the video, you seem like the very kind of person who would enjoy my email newsletter. It's got a lot more on my work as a composer, a music theorist, and a musicologist. So if that sounds interesting to you, I've got the link in the description. Now, let's move on to the word theory. It has perplexed music students throughout the ages that this topic is called music theory and not something more concrete like music facts. And I get it. The dictionary definitions of theory are kind of all over the map. Definitions include everything from wild speculation to a generally accepted principle. I can't remember what the word for that is called. Contronym, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, I'm also going to take a venture and guess that even music theorists would not all agree on the definition of theory as it is used in our field. So we're off to a great start. One definition could mean that our theory is looking for some sort of ideal, hypothetical or otherwise. That is to say, we are looking for a perfect music. Another definition would say that theory provides an explanation as to how something is put together or generally how it works. Now, I have to tell you something that I think might be unsatisfactory to many of you. I think that the word theory in music theory can be all of those things. Music is multifaceted. Music theory is also multifaceted. Before we go on to try to define what theory is, I can tell you what it's not. Once I told someone that I was a music theorist, and they responded with, "I've got one for you. Mozart was assassinated." And let me tell you, that is not a music theory, that is a music conspiracy theory. So now, what about music theory? Music theory attempts to describe the practices and possibilities of music, and music is organized sound. Many have tried to say that music theory is this one thing, or music theory should just be this one thing, but remember, music theory is multifaceted. And it must be. If music is going to be many different things to peoples and times and cultures, then music theory must be as well. So music theory can handle, 1, things that music could be, a theoretical music. It can also, 2, be a description of compositional trends, describing the common practices of music. Innovations in composition tend to be described in music theory as how they have gone against established trends. Of course, that is until it has been copied so many times that it becomes a trend in its own right. These descriptions of compositional trends tend to fall into 2 categories. 1, there's the systemic approach, which is like, here's everything that we know about secondary dominants. And number 2 would be the analysis of techniques that are used in a particular work. Number 3, as we've seen historically, music theory can be used to convey a particular theorist idea of perfect music. That's a more prescriptivist approach. And then perhaps number 4, we should also talk about pedagogical music theory. This also seeks to cover musical trends, but presents them in a prescriptive way for the sake of education. This structure will guide the rest of our conversation. One other thing to note before we continue is that music theory is often perceived as just looking at the written score, but music is an aural art, and so therefore what we hear is just as important, if not more important, than what's on the page. So first, we said that music theory can describe theoretical music. Music theory can handle the what-if question in music, leading us to music making by way of curiosity. It can imagine music that isn't playable either by humans or by technological limitations. However, notation and recording softwares have made the exploration of these possibilities a lot more accessible. The warning here, though, is that if we are exploring the possibilities of music, we must not limit those possibilities to our own preferences. Otherwise, we run the risk of concluding that the possibilities of music are limited to a particular tradition of music. I don't know, like 18th century German music, for example. Not only is this problematic for the field of music as a whole, but it limits the joy of discovery and innovation. Second, we have descriptive music theory, and this is when music theory describes the processes of music. In order for us to do this, music must be transmitted in some way, performed, written down, recorded, etc. In other words, it can't just be in the composer's head. When we are describing the processes of music, we do not approach that music with some sort of rubric in our hand determining how close this music came to some supposed gold standard. We must not, as the medieval music theorists did, separate the practice of music from some purported perfect music, as we are often wont to do. We rather describe each existing sound as it is organized, on its own terms. It would be ridiculous for us to look at an octagon and conclude that it did a bad job of being a hexagon. Descriptive music theory is not a prescription saying that music should have been written this way. It's not a sport. Our goal isn't to find out what music is best, although I suppose the existence of the Grammy Awards makes that a difficult statement to defend. Number 3, we have prescriptive music theory. If you wanted to write a treatise on exactly what you thought the best music possible was, music theory could accommodate you. As I just mentioned, a good many medieval music theorists did just that, and they are not wrong for doing so. However, it would be wrong to suggest that your idea of perfect music is the only correct definition of music. So, does this type of music theory have any place in a modern context? And I think it does. I still find this helpful in the journey of musical self-discovery. You can ask yourself, what do I like about music? What do I not like about music? If it were up to me, what would the rules of music be? This can tell you a lot about who you are as a musician, a performer, a composer, and music theory makes all of that possible. Finally, we have pedagogical music theory, which I mentioned is also a type of prescriptive music theory. Students who have little exposure to the field of music theory outside of their music theory classrooms tend to apply their experiences in that classroom to the field as a whole. However, certain aspects of the music theory classroom are presented for the purposes of education and don't necessarily apply to quote-unquote real music. Despite this fact, it certainly appears to those students that what is true of the temporary training wheels is true of the entire bicycle. If, for example, you wanted to learn how to write in the style of J.S. Bach, it would be a good thing for you to learn that parallel fifths are less desirable than, say, contrary motion. However, it would not necessarily be good for you to carry that principle over into other traditions of music. That being said, telling someone who would like to learn music, there are no rules, is not particularly helpful. It's no more helpful than handing a first grader the alphabet for the first time and saying, you now have everything you need to write a novel. Pedagogical music theory, in the same way, is necessary for musical development. However, its function must be understood in the greater context of the entire field of music theory. So now that we've looked at the different types of music theory, let's ask about the scope of music theory. What organized sound does music theory describe? All of them. Well, it should be all of them. Music is different things to different cultures at different times in history, and music theory must be able to describe all of those musics. That's not to say that there is some overarching theory of everything for the field of music, forever and ever, amen. That would likely be incredibly vague or entirely unhelpful. Or perhaps it would lean entirely too philosophical and we would just say, music is. So it's best to understand the term music theory as the name for our entire field, and contained within our field there are thousands of theories of music. The problem with music theory is when it gets stuck in a particular time and place. The family of augmented six chords stands forever as the perfect example of a calculus student who is like, when am I ever going to use this in the real world? But the thing is if music theory is describing innovations in music composition, then necessarily it must be behind those innovations to some extent. Music theory, as a field, when it's functioning correctly, is constantly changing and evolving to match the constantly changing and evolving field of music. Music theory isn't just something that we learn once. Music theory is a valuable and practical art form that benefits all musicians throughout their lifetime. In conclusion, what is music theory? Music theory is a field that attempts to observe both the processes and possibilities of a collection of non-universal organized sound traditions using the correct tools and models respective to each tradition in order to describe how each sound is organized or could be organized. Yeah, I think that just about covers it. For all of you who have been with me for the last 10 years, it's been a lot of fun, and I am incredibly thankful to have just been able to nerd out and talk about music theory with all of you. Here's to the next 10. And if you would like to see me react to my first music theory video in real time, I have got that available up for members on my website. So make sure to check that out. Thanks for watching.